Okay, today we are going to talk about lesson 2. Today, the first part here is more a review. If you remember, we talked about how there was a golden age in Greece from 500 to about 350. Hopefully you remember that the golden age means that there was this time the economy is doing well and there's a big focus on arts and architecture and learning. And so it's during this time that they also developed philosophy, and we talked about what philosophy meant, right? And so they're really a lot, this is a lot of study of all different kinds of learning and reasoning and really just like logically thinking. And so here is one group of philosophers that were called the Sophists. And they traveled around and actually got paid to teach. So they taught the normal subjects like science and history and mathematics, but they also taught rhetoric, which is public speaking and debate. And that's one of the reasons they got a little bit criticized, is because they did teach kind of that debate. And some other philosophers felt like that they were more like good arguers, right? That they taught them to argue well rather than just like the bigger lofty ideas of like seeking truth, right? Also, they were critical, some of them, of sophists taking money for teaching. Some of them thought that this was kind of crass, right? That you should be doing these things because of your love of learning and not getting money for it. The other major thing Sophists thought was that, humans decided their fate. They did not get influenced by the gods like has been previously normally thought. They also did not think there was any absolute right or wrong. So, for instance, what's right for you might be wrong for someone else. It's not like there's just one right way or one wrong way to act or to believe. Okay, and so Socrates is in another camp. He actually was one of the really people who did not like the Sophists. We don't have any writings directly of Socrates, but what we know what he thought because his students wrote down, recorded his thinking and his teaching. He did believe that there was absolute truth and like knowledge that everyone had, and they just had to kind of look for it, okay? And so he used the Socratic method, which I think some of you have had classes taught that way before, and you probably will again, that instead of lecturing, it's more about questioning and people discussing and coming up with answers kind of on their own rather than being told them by someone. So that's how he taught. Unfortunately, at this time, teaching people to question was kind of a dangerous idea. Athens, even though it's always been, open to debate, recently, because of the problems they've had after the Peloponnesian War, some of their rights have kind of been limited, and they have been not encouraging having so much free thinking and open debate. And unfortunately, his doing the opposite, right, of teaching people that you should, seek knowledge for yourself and not, just follow blindly, and that you should, it's okay to debate and question things. That was seen as dangerous, and so he actually was brought up in charges. They thought he was, teaching people dangerous things, and he wanted the young people to rebel against the government. And so they found him guilty. And interestingly enough, that he could have left. The choices were, if you leave Athens, you can live, but you have to, leave forever, and you're no longer a citizen of Athens. Or if you stay, you're going to be sentenced to death. And he actually chose to stay. And because he said that I live in this society, and if the laws here are that I had a fair trial and the jury said that I did something wrong, then I should, be punished. And so he drank poison and, killed himself to carry out the sentence. So Plato is the next person we want to talk about. And actually, Plato was one of Socrates' students, okay? He also became a teacher, and he started a school called the Academy in Athens. And one of the things he was talking a lot about, and he wrote a book called The Republic, was that he had a new idea for how the government should be run and how society basically should run. He thought there should be three main groups in the society. The top group would be the philosopher kings, meaning that they are kings that are very educated and they're going to rule through logic, okay? Then there's the second group, the warriors, and of course they're the ones who are going to defend the whole society, and they would have to use force, of course, but that's necessary. And then everyone else basically is, just everyone else is, their job is to just provide, right? Provide food if you're a farmer, or make clothing or other artisan goods, right? And you're doing things to provide, okay? And he thought that only the philosopher kings would be smart enough really to rule, and that they would do whatever was the best decision for everyone and look out for everyone. And because he did not think that the common people would really be able to do that and be educated enough to make the right decisions. Interestingly, though, he did think that women should have more rights than they had currently, and should get more education and equal jobs and things. Okay, so let's see. So I mentioned how he started the academy. Okay, and then let's talk about Aristotle then. Aristotle is another famous thinker. He also started a school called the Lyceum, and he wrote a lot about his different thoughts on politics and astronomy, and one of the interesting things he thought was about, they called it the golden mean. If you remember in math, how a mean is like an average, kind of, right? So that means like take the middle road. For example, if you eat, when you eat, don't eat too much or too little, right? Don't be a pig, but don't also not eat enough. So you just, in the middle is somewhere a happy medium where you'll stay healthy. And he thought that should apply to like everything in life, okay? But he also did a lot of scientific observations. We have a lot of the classifications for animals and things now because of how he started noticing how they're similar, and that's how we kind of developed science around those ideas. He also wrote a book called Politics, and he had this idea that there's basically three types of government. And they are the ones we've been talking about, right? Monarchy, or rule by one person. Oligarchy, which is ruled by a few people. And then the third, which is democracy, which is the ones we talked about with Athens, right? In that society, it was everyone got a say. So he thought actually that all three of those should be combined, and that would make the best government. So, and that is, of course, what we have if you think about it, right? Like a chief executive, we have a president who is like kind of like a monarch, right? Like the ruler who's like the head, at least ceremonial, right? And then we have an oligarchy with the legislature, right? Which we have Congress, and that would be, picked by the people. And then, of course, the democracy, the rule by the many, is because we have a say in who gets chosen for that legislature, right? So he wrote about that, and actually that had a big impact because in Europe, and a lot of these ideas, were taken up and used when they made their governments. And of course, we, the United States, coming from England and using a lot of those ideas, also have this, right? So it's interesting that someone who lived so long ago had such a big impact so much later. All right, and then speaking of impacts, we should talk about some historians who changed the way history was written. Remember, we talked about how back at this time originally, everyone believed that the gods really, did affect how things turned out. And so Herodotus was one of the first ones who wrote down history. He still did believe that the gods were playing a role, but he really tried to make sure that, the history was written correctly and truthfully, and really researched what was done and wrote it all down. But although he still did believe that the gods were having an impact, he's called the father of history because of that, trying really to only write down what was fact and not just made up stuff, which is previously had been done. Thucydides is another famous historian who wrote about the Peloponnesian War, and he did not believe that the gods affected human history. He did think it was, man's doing, but he also tried to really write down what was true and kind of, investigate it himself. He went and saw battle sites, and he talked to eyewitnesses and, examined documents for himself. So he, again, was trying to really record what was, truthful. The other interesting thing about him was that he not only wrote down, all the facts he had gathered, but he also tried to, analyze the facts and come up with the causes and effects, because he thought people could learn from history. And so he did some analysis to try to, lead to why the things happened the way they did. All right, and then, as we always do, we're going to talk about what scientific advancements we get from each group. So in this one, we have a few different ones. There's Thales, who studied astronomy mostly, but also mathematics. And interesting, a lot of these discoveries, things that they figured out, were pretty amazing, considering they didn't have all the technology and like telescopes and things that we have today. Pythagoras, I know that you know, right, because of geometry class. If you remember, the Pythagorean theorem, right, is the way that you can figure out the lengths of the sides of a triangle. Hopefully you remember that. So that's kind of amazing too, right, is that something figured out so long ago is still taught in classes today. And then Hippocrates, if you remember the Hippocratic Oath, maybe you've heard of that. He was known as the father of medicine, and this is one of his big things that, we still have today, that doctors take this oath to agree that, they'll try their best to help a patient, and that also it's very important to keep their privacy too. And so that's still said today. Also, Hippocrates was really big on, in that time, people thought, you got sick because of evil spirits and things. And he was more of a scientist and believed that there was actually, a real cause. And he would try to figure out and diagnose the illnesses and come up with treatments, not, based on spirits and things like that. Okay, that is it for today. Thank you.